1981 Donruss Dave Kingman. Behold Kong in his natural habitat. Do you ever wonder what happens to big league parks when the lights go down? If you've ever been to a major league stadium or even paid attention to the non-action shots on a television broadcast, you know there are plenty of dark crannies that aren't readily accessible to the average fan. What lurked in the shadows beyond the bullpens in the old cookie-cutter stadiums like Riverfront Stadium or Veterans Stadium? What happens behind the green monster scoreboard when winter sets in and the Boston Red Sox are scattered to the winds? And what sort of aquatic secrets do the Kauffman Stadium waterfalls harbor? I know a few select folks know the answer to these individual questions, but the rest of us are left to speculate. And it was one of those types of mysteries that began stirring in my addled brain as I considered what card to profile today. I want to talk about a card showing a stadium I want to visit but never have. The field for this one is wide because I've only made it to a handful of big league parks: Riverfront Stadium, Great American Ballpark, Fenway Ballpark, Jacobs Field, Busch Stadium, though not to actually see a game. So I decided to first pick the park I most want to visit, then find a card that shows that park to some degree. If the cardboard could also help me answer one of the game's lingering questions, all the better. And with all due respect to Dodger Stadium, AT&T Park, and Camden Yards, the place I most want to visit is Wrigley Field. It shouldn't be all that hard to accomplish considering my Hoosier roots, but the trip to Addison and Clark has somehow eluded me to this point. I've seen Wrigley in its televised glory hundreds of times over the years, though, and it seems to me there's no other venue that can capture the neighborhood feel and deep history all in one fell swoop like the Chicago Cubs home. Maybe someday I'll prove that notion to myself. In the meantime, I'm left to ponder how wonderful the place must be, but also to wonder what sorts of creatures might be hiding in the fabled Wrigley Field ivy. I mean, that stuff's been there since before World War II, right? There's been plenty of time for an infestation of one sort or another to develop. So I went searching for a card that might give me some insight into the secrets of the ivy, and my first stop bore fruit. As an ancient person who has been collecting baseball cards since they were made out of granite, I remember vividly that roughly 112% of all 1981 Donruss cards featured the Wrigley Field ivy in the background. The other 12% were test cards that were actually better than their Topps counterparts. I could have picked any one of those cards for this piece, but there was only one that really made sense. Card number 553 of Dave Kingman. By the time Kingman signed as a free agent with the Cubs before the 1978 season, Kong was already pretty much who he was going to be. A monstrous dude with a monstrous swing who could hit the ball out of the Grand Canyon but couldn't get on base or do a whole lot else, including stay in one place for very long. Still, it's somewhat astonishing it took him so long to land with the Cubs, considering how cozy the cozy confines were, especially with favorable wind conditions. You might say he was born to play with the Cubs. In this first year by the lake, Kingman turned in a Kingman-esque season, featuring 28 home runs and 79 RBI. In 1979, though, it all clicked, and Kingman slammed 49 homers, drove in 115, and even hit 288. The perfect marriage was working perfectly. Then, 1980 brought injuries that limited Kong to just 81 games and saw his production fall to 278, 18, and 57. Before the 1981 season could even begin, Chicago traded him to the New York Mets in exchange for Steve Henderson. Nothing could erase the work he'd done with the Cubs, though, or the idea that Kingsman's rightful place would always be there among the ivy, tantalizingly close to home plate, especially for a slugger of his stature. To drive that point home, collectors spent that first summer of Kingman's Mets tenure pulling his 1981 Donruss card from fresh wax packs. Captured there in cardboard bliss for eternity was a smiling Kong, enveloped by the green ivory of his natural habitat. And this card also solves one of baseball's mysteries. We know what lives, or lived, in the Wrigley Field ivy. It's Kong himself.